This is probably like your I just want clarification. I'm not sure if I know there's chipping and mastication.
You can't hear them. Can you repeat? Sorry.
Difference between mastication and chipping. Is that mastication just sort of that mobile chipper thing?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I had a hard time hearing. Yeah, difference between mastication and chipping. Chipper is going to be something that hand crew feeds. They cut the chain, feed the chipper. Generally, you can feed it with the machine too, I guess. But and the masticator is usually mounted on a tracked machine, either an excavator type machine or a skid steer type machine.
Is that material just left lying then?
Generally, in a mastication, it's left lying there. Chipping, if you have the market for biomass, you could haul the chips to a facility.
I forgot your name with the Forest Service, but
Christian.
okay. Coming from private forestry and, the planning window is, 6 months for a functionally equivalent CEQA document, to comply with California environmental laws. On Forest Service, we got NEPAs, we got a categorical exclusion, environmental assessment, and then an EIS. So when I went to work for the county and working with Patty and her crew, I was absolutely shocked at the planning window with the Forest Service. It was like 5 years to get anything done. So now on these planning thing, you were talking about EAs. For your initially on this project, you said it was in the works and been working for a while before you showed up. And I don't know whether you did an EIS or an EA, whatever, to get going the first time. But now when you have to go back and hopefully, whatever the period this would be of our fire intervals is, it's 7 years or 10 years or 15, when you go back, are you going to be able to use a categorical exemption or something where you can go bang and just get it done? Or are you going to have to, even an E, I don't know what your timelines are for this anymore, but, are you going to hit the ground running and get this done so that when it's time to burn, or are we going to have to go?
I'll take a stab at it, and I luckily have some good backup here to assist me. So what he's referencing is the environmental document, which is basically the rule book, which allows us to go in and do a thing. And the federal government is very large, and the stuff's in place to provide the public with input. That way, the different agencies just aren't out running around. The downside of it is somewhat of a set of handcuffs when you're trying to outpace large scale catastrophic wildfire. You can't just identify the pertinent spot like Rick's talking about and get in there and get the work done in a timely manner. However, there is stuff being developed. There's a forest-wide assessment being done that'll allow specifically to prescribe fire and fuel treatments. That will be done across the forest, which will help expedite that. Some other stuff that's being worked on. I got to participate in a categorical exclusion project I did on the South Fork of the Salmon River. And the process has been long, but one thing that has happened out of all this, there's a private nonprofit that is building out a tool called Turbo Planner, which is basically similar to TurboTax, your tax planning software, to expedite the process as we're developing these documents and we're going through to make it faster so we could be more proactive and less reactive. But it is very complex, and there's a lot of input in every different category. And we do our best. A lot of say on East Fork Scott, we once we have that document completed, I believe as long as we're in the same condition, we could reintroduce fire potentially, say, 10 years out, as long as there hasn't been a big change underneath that original document. Is that correct, Danica?
Yeah.
And there's other little tools that we could use to depending on the size and the change to expedite that. But a lot of our stuff is built into where we could do multiple years worth of treatment.
Funding at this point in time. Can you comment on what you see out there?
I'll comment.
Hi, everybody. Real quick, not on the panel, but I am Natalie Kelly. I'm the district ranger here on the Salmon Scott River Ranger District. Sorry, I could not be here. Thank you. Yeah, we got a lot going on, so I was not able to make it the last few days. So, yeah, that is a concern. That is also my concern as well. We are in a pause. We've been told by OPM, Washington office, that they were reviewing all funds in relation, all federal funds. Some of the funds, and I don't have a timeline, are fire and fuels, specific dollars tied to critical partners that are sitting in this room that do this work, because we recognize on this district, which is about 660,000 acres of land, 3 wildernesses, we have about 100 employees total, and that's seasonal workforce included. So acre by acre, the math isn't mathing. And with that, since I've been in my position going on 3 years, and the work that's already been done, especially within this valley and the partnerships, we've really tried to ramp up. And the bipartisan money was our real hope to have an impact. And it's a very concerning time for us as well. Yes.
Well, there's an article there's an article in the Times today that there's an about face by the Trump administration as it relates to not federal, they were using the nomenclature national park. So they immediately announced, I guess it was this morning, that all the national park folks are back to work. So they haven't already found other jobs, but did that reversal extend to the U.S. Forest Service, or is it limited just to the national park? Do you know the park?
That would just be to the parks. So we lost 8 employees on this district that have impacts to recreation, range, and timber management last week. And we have not heard if we're able to return those folks. But I will say that it does have impacts on a huge level. And I can talk about that further. I don't want to take up the whole panel's time. I know there's other questions, but I'll take one more, and then I really would like to step out, but I'll stay around for questions.
Yeah, I'm just curious what the current status is on the NEPA process, if you know, through the Forest Service.
The current status as far as changes.
For instance, we've been waiting for 3 years to get NEPA approval on our project with the Mid-Atlantic Watershed Council, and we were told that we're going to get that done, this spring. So I was just wondering if that's been held up, or if it's been suspended, or.
Yeah, let me have Danica answer that. We did also have to.
We can talk after.
Okay, yeah. We did also lose our NEPA planner, so yes, there could be some implications of that as well. But I'll be around. Don't want to take over this group's time, and thank you. Can't wait to meet you all.
Hi, thanks for your time. Thanks for that explanation. I know that's something that's all in the back of our minds. But I'm going to switch it back up to ecology. I was thinking about the invasive annual grasses in the chaparral oak woodland mosaic. We all know that in other parts of the country, annual grasses in chaparral have contributed to this, type replacement, stand replacement. I was wondering, I suppose, is that a concern / do you think about the understory, post-burn?
Is that for me?
Whoever. You guys are all fired, folks.
I think at least in the Watershed Council's projects where, at least in this project that we're endeavoring on Hayden Ridge, really seeing a lack of understory, and basically we're trying to create gaps and openings where understory can exist, and these kind of just really dense pine stands. But
I think in coniferous forests, this may not be so much of the syndrome, but in the Medusa head, for example, like in your oak woodlands you can see it from the road, like a pretty prolific thatch cover that exists in between the, whitethorn buckbrush and all your oaks. So yeah, it might not be so much a concern in a place where you've got a lot of conifers, but
yeah, definitely a valid concern. And I think, our ecosystems are just kind of out of balance in general, the lack of fire. And I think the more we can do to kind of reintroduce that fire, and maybe Medusa head will respond positively to that. We would hope not, but a lot, you can, I think reintroducing these natural processes are going to help push us towards more native composition.
Dean, can you speak to some of the complications and challenges that you faced when you were doing that dead and dying salvage that was not a grant funded process? It was supported by the forest products and markets, and kind of some of those things that were unforeseen or that you didn't anticipate and affected the landowner and the logger.
Sure. Yeah. So, a lot of these projects are grant funded. Our East Fork Forest Health Project was, besides the technical assistance, we received a small grant to have a professional forester assist with the project. We were trying to fund the whole project through the sale of the timber that we were harvesting, which is kind of your classic timber sale approach, right? And our problem was that even with the emergency notice, from the time of starting planning the project to logging, I think was 3 months. It's not very long, but even in that short period, we saw a lot of degradation in the wood itself, where our estimates of what we were going to produce were a lot less when it came time to harvest, because we'd seen that the hot, dry summer had caused cracking in the wood, and the veneer plant does not like cracked logs. It doesn't make a nice product for them. So there are a lot of difficulties in that, and I think time's kind of the essence, and when you're responding to something like that, and that's why we'd really like to get ahead of these things and look at forest health before we have such degraded forest stands that it's kind of this emergency to deal with.
Well, I think something folks can also start looking for or looking into to help mitigate that is more a programmatic approach. So in Hearst Forest, we have what's called a programmatic timber EIR. It essentially allows us to have similar to a EIS. It's a long-term assessment of an area. So as long as we're within the scope of that assessment, we're able to have much faster harvest documents. Our harvest documents are allowed to get through regulation review a lot faster. So I know the Mattole Watershed Council, they have an EIR in their watershed. It's not effectively that used, I think, just because of how it's written, but I think it's something we could see more in landscape for landscape management.
This is a question for Patty. For landowners that are not exposed to the PBA, what type of levels of engagement might they be able to participate in joining the PBA?
Well, we do our best, and actually my colleague Michael McGill's here too, but we do our best to staff a lot of outreach events, try to reach out to people, and connect that way. I think our social media presence I need a social media person, apparently. Our presence certainly could be ramped up that way. But
again, landowners are very welcome. I'll tell a funny story on myself in terms of these, excuse me, PBA burns that, would allow volunteers to come and join in burning and have that hands-on experience. And that is, I worked for the Forest Service for a long time, and, I approved more than one burn plan, during that time. And I always appreciated, good people like this that were out doing it. So now it's me, and I have a great appreciation because I think we had two burn opportunities last fall that got nixed because of the weather at the last minute, So I have more appreciation for these people than ever in terms of like all the work that you ramp up into. So, again, just landowners reach out to me, Michael, anybody at the RCD. We are, on the web, little click here, talk to us.
Maybe a workshop.
That's a darn good idea. I wish I'd thought of that. So no, we're working on some workshop stuff together.
This question is for Justin. You ready? Thanks for not killing all the lakes, but I was thinking if the study test sites where you do get rid of the fish, the populations increase. Is there a chance that this study will trickle out to or say it the frog gets listed? Now, are you guys going to be expanding that and spreading it to a wider source? And potentially, it's kind of a two-part question. Those isolated areas that obviously, if there's no fish, they might do well and the populations will grow. Could that also attract in this thing that's been killing the frogs because of population densities?
So the second part is the chytrid fungus is affecting amphibians around the world. They're finding in the Sierra, where they study this really intensely, that the more frogs that are out there on in different habitats, it's better for their survival because some populations are able to build resistance to the disease where others succumb. So the more habitat that's available to the frogs, the better. And as far as I think your question was, are we going to remove more fish on the landscape if the frog gets listed? Our agency is responsible for this problem. It's a weird situation because we are the sole responsible person. We put the fish there. We manage fisheries. We've been doing it for over 100 years. So it's a very specific responsibility for us to respond to this problem. And we're being proactive by finding lakes that are not good fisheries and identifying those as it's just without even thinking about the frogs, what's good for the fish, right? And that's why we separate these things. And we're trying to put them in those categories so the public understands that this is not a good fish lake. And hey, yes, it's going to have some frog benefits, possibly. The targeted places where we are working is very small. Like I said, it's 1% of the surface area of water in this area. And it's a lot of work. It takes 4 years to remove fish from a site on average, at least with other work that's been done in the past. So it's a serious commitment. And it takes many years to pull it off. So we're really selective on where that happens. And, I guess I didn't mention it, but the 25% of the lakes that have gone fishless on their own without us stocking them, we consider that already a policy. Because of that policy shift of not stocking, that's a conservation win that we're claiming, and that's in addition to the lakes where we're removing fish. So we've already kind of fixed a lot by doing nothing, and then the places where we're very active and we have our scalpel out, that's with only the small capacity that we have. So, like I said, if we want to remove fish from every lake with the methods we're doing, we would only get to half of them, and it would take decades. So that's not going to happen. The frogs are doing pretty well in the Trinity Alps. It's these other places that we may need to do a little more Like the Russians have fish in every single water, and there's no meadows in the Russians. Well, there's a few places with meadows, but the big difference between the Russians and like say the Trinity Alps is a lot more meadow systems. There's a lot more alternative habitat for them. The Russians are kind of drier and less ponds, less alternative choices. And I'm not saying we're going to go in and pull a fish out of the Russians either. It's just there's very few strategic locations to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have two completely separate questions. For you, it sounded to me like to try to have a forest that's managed for resiliency and for purely for forest health is almost like trying to get oil and water to mix with having it be a top timber product, like looking at it as a way to get the most resources out of the forest over, in a consistent way. It sounds like to try to come up with not a compromise or whatever. Hitting in the middle, both sides kind of lose a lot. It doesn't sound like there's a win-win type of a situation in that.
Yeah, that's personally how I'm feeling about it right now. It's just, I think that quote from John Lieberg, you made a good point. Just 35% capacity of production. And that's probably what is needed throughout the landscape to get them to that point again. It's just there. But the main thing is we can also separate, there's working forest and then, maybe pull out for resilient forest and just kind of focusing where they work the best,
And the second question I have is just kind of to the broad spectrum of you folks up there. And I've seen data that makes me question a concern of mine, and that is that the control burns and the burn piles and things like that, they're really effective at solving the solution that you're trying to achieve. And the one thing that I've heard from different sources is that the unintended consequences of using that tool in the toolbox doesn't always get weighed into the equation of whether that's the tool that's used or not. And specifically, I've seen, satellite imagery of areas where there were, historical burn piles during logging operations and things like that. And 40 and 50 years later, there's still a scar on the land where that area either got so sterilized or whatever like that, that the native plants and things that, we're hoping to have come back after we do a treatment is actually excluded from that area because, whatever it was, the balance of what needs to make those seeds hatch, it is screwed up. How much research is being put into looking at those potential unintended consequences of achieving what you want with the tool of fire?
I'll take a stab at it. So, very good point, and it was making me think about the example earlier that Dane brought up about doing an underburn through a mastication unit, for example. And the soil is such an important part of one of our pieces, and that's why luckily, we have a very robust team in every single category, and we check all of those boxes. But you have your first order fire effects and your second order fire effects. And your second order fire effects would be not necessarily the actual removal of the pile or the material, but it would be the long-term effect, which is when you're referencing the sterile soil, right? So when we're burning pot piles, that soil is gonna get so hot, it's gonna be not usable for a pretty long period of time. And so typically we want to weigh all those considerations and then look at how could we reintroduce fire in a natural way. And that's where if you are burning a mastication unit, typically if we're burning it in a natural environment, those fuels aren't sitting on the soil, they're up in the air. So the soil doesn't necessarily get very hot, but once you reorient that fuel load and you put it down on the ground and then you burn through, you're going to have a higher impact on soil. So in my department, we take all of that stuff into consideration, and then we really try to choose what is the best tool. Maybe it's just hand cut and pile. Maybe it's no treatment. Maybe it's mastication, walk away. So we're constantly evaluating that, and the soil integrity is very critical, especially with erosion and all the different stuff. But it's a balance. Land management's not perfect, but it's a balance between trying to reduce catastrophic wildfire and build resiliency within your system. I don't know if that helps.
I think too, speaking to your question, you do see a lot of sterilization of soil when it comes to burning these big logging slash piles, but generally you don't see it as much in our hand piling. We limit our piles to about 4 feet by 4 feet, and really the heat given off most of those piles are not enough to scar the soil or degrade the soil too much, especially if you're burning brush. It's a relatively quick process.
Question for Megan. Have any of the processes you use to fill these gullies, have any of them gone through a winter? I'm just curious if they have and how they did.
So up in Rock Fence, yes, we have structures that went through winter and a runoff season. And some of them came out looking pretty similar, and some of them, moved around a bit. But there was one when up there, when I was up there, when there was still a lot of snow on the ground last spring, in one of the side channels, and it was really cool to see the water that was backed up behind it.
Thank you.
I just to add to that, Megan, I think that's a really good point about because I've seen the structures in the middle of summer, and there's really, if you don't know they're there, it's kind of like there's nothing going on. But just getting your eyes on the ground when things are running off, So I'm just kind of curious. I don't know very little about the Cascade frog, and obviously I understand that they're breeding largely in the shallow parts of the lakes, as you said. But what role do the adjacent meadows have for the frogs cycles and?
Very important. They also breed in meadows and ponds and meadows. So they can breed in meadow ponds, and lakes. They tend to like protected areas in the lakes because they're wave swept shores. It's just ponds are just smaller. They don't have that kind of wave action that a big lake will. Meadow. This is a meadow frog. It loves meadows. Where Megan's working, they're throughout that system. They're there. They move a lot between habitats. Like I said, it takes a basin to raise a frog. So the lakes with the fish are not independent of the landscape around them. Whatever impacts are happening in the lake, it's also impacting the frogs in the meadow because they cruise over there during the summer and hang out. Frogs tend to not hang out with where they breed because there's a lot of snakes that eat the young and, just a lot of native predators. So they tend to bail, at least the adults do, and move to adjacent sites. So meadows really play a key role. And meadows are very productive areas to feed. You think of a lake shore, it's just a single, edge of water. A meadow has all kinds of streams and all kinds of habitat for bugs that they like to eat. So they're very productive, and that's why amphibians thrive in meadow systems, especially ones that have wetlands in them. And, some of those log placements you're putting in, slowing it and spreading it, all that's creating that seasonal habitat or expanding it because they need meadows with surface water.
Great. Send a big thank you to our presenters. Thank you all for making this a productive and meaningful forum. And I just want to hand this off.
There is food left out, and
I'm going to hand this over to you.
Yeah, well, I first want to say thank you, Molly. You were a gracious It was a great day when Molly and Dane chose to move into the valley and take home, and they bought a house, and so hopefully they're here to stay for a long time. Thank you again for everybody that's been here from the beginning, or if you were just here for today. I thought this was a really great 3 days. I know personally I have gained a ton. I'm inspired for our future, and I look forward to having more conversations about all the things that we've talked about. Please feel free. We have a lot of leftover food. There is no activities for the rest of the afternoon, and we don't really have any time line for having to leave here. So Larry and Peggy, thank you. This is Our place is open for other venues. Larry has really, and not to speak for you, Larry, but it was a kind of a vision of his to build something for our community that can serve just a wide range of activities, from forums to film festivals, music concerts. They had a kids program with the farm school kids, and Jen was speaking of how fun the kids had. Peter's son might have been here. So thank you for your vision and for your investment into our community. It's really today. This has been by far just the acoustics, the visuals, the space, and how you really organized it in a really friendly and useful way. So thank you. Please reach out. Let's stay in touch, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Sorry.